Welcome to the Blockchain VC, a podcast about crypto and the digital assets ecosystem. My name is Tomer Federman. I invest in the most promising blockchain startups across the globe. I have more than 15 years of experience in tech, and before I started investing, I was on the product side at Facebook, where I led product strategy and global growth of some of Facebook's major ad products. Previously, I also lived in Silicon Valley for a few years, where I attended Stanford Business School. You can find me on Twitter at Tomer Federman. Before we begin, please note that this podcast is for informational purposes only. Nothing on the Blockchain VC podcast represents an investment or financial advice. Please do your own research. Also, if you like this episode of the Blockchain VC and want to help bring more awareness to the space, I'd really appreciate it if you can rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. This only takes a few seconds and helps get the word out. Okay, let's do this.
I have a very special episode today. Excited to welcome to the show Arthur Breitman, co-founder of Tezos. Arthur, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tomer.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathleen came on the show a few months ago, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to also get your perspective. So really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
So Arthur, to kick things off, would love to learn more about your background and what you did before you got into the crypto space.
Well, originally, my background is mostly in finance. I worked at a few large banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and I was working on market making and high frequency trading. But I would say my area of expertise was mostly statistics, and I did a stint at Waymo, which was a branch of Google X that was working on self-driving cars. So I did this for about a year, and in the background of that, Tezos was this kind of hobby project which grew and grew and grew in importance, and at some point it became too big for me to ignore, and so I left my job to focus more closely on it.
Right. And what was your area of expertise again?
Statistics.
Statistics. So what? You built like statistical models at these banks?
Yeah, that's right. So I would do a lot of statistical analysis of time series, of order books, and deriving trading rule from those statistics.
Does that mean that you work closely with traders at the bank, or was that more closely with the IT department?
No. So typically, I would be on the trading desk. So there are traders, and the job of the traders is oftentimes to monitor the algorithm, try to understand what's going on in the market, make sure that nothing is going haywire. You can think of it as if you're piloting a complex plane. Right, the plane is doing a lot of the logic for the pilot. The pilot is not controlling every single detail of the plane. They're looking at the instruments and they're figuring out what to do based on the instruments. And so even though a lot is automated, you still have the pilot looking at that. And you can think of the trader in an electronic trading desk a little bit as the pilot of the plane, trying to get a lay of the land and making sure that the plane is flying overall in the right direction, and there's no indicator that indicates anything is wrong, and so on and so forth. And what's the quants build typically is the rules for the autopilot.
Right. How did you like it?
It's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. There's really interesting problems, and you could keep digging at these problems and finding new interesting things about them for many years. But at some point, I did want to do something a little bit different. The thing was, I had quite a bit of interest in machine learning techniques. And the problem in finance is that a lot of the machine learning techniques you might want to throw at it are just simply not going to work, because by construction, it's an anti-inductive process in the sense of any signals that you can have is basically going to be treated away. And so as a result, the things that you're very happy when you have a simple linear regression, which will give you like a tiny correlation. And that's what you're after, and you're after a lot of these tiny things. And most of the interesting research in machine learning and statistics had been being able to deal with very complex, very rich structure with not a lot of noise. and that's not what you have at all in finance, but that's something you might find in robotics, for example.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is really compelling working at such places is just the magnitude of the operation, right? Like the scale, the amount of, money that's flowing pretty much on a single day is just crazy, right? And so I'd imagine that can be quite interesting just from that perspective alone.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the notional, of course, the notional is going to be hard, pretty high. It was traded back and forth, but overall, high frequency trading is actually a pretty small industry. It's maybe a few billions a year. I think it has a disproportionate visibility because it's weird and it's strange, and there was a lot of media coverage over it. But overall, it's a tiny part of the economy.
Yeah, that's probably fair. It's very opaque for sure for those on the outside. So I think there's just like a lot of mystery around it, and people are wondering how it works and so forth.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you have a ton. There's a ton of very advanced research that exists in those places. It's just that they do not publish. Like no one,
Yeah,
no bank, no trading desk is going to publish any of the stuff that they do. Whereas I would say in other industries where you're doing the research is almost also has a PR component in the sense that you want to attract people who are interested by these research problems, and so you publish a little more, but really not at all in finance.
yeah, it's very different from that perspective for sure. Okay, so you work there and then you said like you saw Tezos and at some point you just couldn't ignore it anymore. What was it about Tezos that you found so compelling and that really drew you to become more involved?
Well, for a while I was involved with Tezos, and there was not a lot of attention on the project. The papers came out, and there were a few fans, but it was pretty scattered. And I think people really started paying attention to Tezos in 2016 um, with two events: the DAO hack and the Ethereum, but most importantly, the Ethereum hard fork. A lot of the things that have been theorized in the Tezos white paper and in the Tezos position paper were about the dynamics of hard forks, the importance of core development teams, what is the economics of hard fork, how these things take place, and how they can be managed. And it also talks about the security of smart contracts. And so, in the context of both the DAO hack and the DAO hard fork, and in the context of the block size war in Bitcoin, all of a sudden, the content of the Tezos paper was in the zeitgeist, and people were like, "Hang on, this is actually this was actually a really good call made years before any of this happened."
Absolutely. And I think, as I mentioned, Kathleen Brightman, your wife and co founder, was on the show a few months ago. And I think she mentioned that as well, that during that period, you both realized just how interesting Tezos is and could see the differences versus some other platforms. I guess I'm wondering for many folks who are in the space or who entered the space around that period, they tended to focus on, either Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? And you mentioned the fork. Yes, there was this big debate around the Ethereum fork. But I guess I'm curious, like, what was it about Tezos that made you say, hey, you know what? Cool, there's these two big projects happening, but we actually want to focus on that lesser known project at the time, Tezos, because we see something special there. What was it? Was it really like you saw some components that maybe didn't exist in other platforms, or?
Well, uh, the Tezos paper mentions Ethereum, but at the time, Ethereum was really also just an idea. It had, there was no Ethereum network at the time, so Tezos is not, in some sense, is more of a contemporaneous with the creation of Ethereum. It
Right,
happened to
that's
launch
a fair point.
later than Ethereum, but it's created around the same time. And so I think that neither Ethereum nor Bitcoin addressed the type of questions and problematics that Tezos wanted to address.
Okay, So then what? You started to get involved and decided at some point to leave your job and focus on Tezos full time?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It happened very fast.
It's a big decision though.
Yeah, it was. But there was so much enthusiasm and interest for the project. I think that made it pretty much a no-brainer.
And so for folks who might not be familiar with Tezos, can you provide a quick overview of what Tezos is?
Sure. So Tezos is a technology that lets you deploy a fairly generic kind of blockchain which can change itself. So typically in a blockchain, the rules are set at the beginning, and if you want to change them, you basically need to agree with everyone else. Everyone patches their servers. Everyone just like reruns new code. You don't have to do this with Tezos, and so with Tezos, the chain is capable of collecting proposals for changes to its own rule set, and is capable of gathering consensus around that change and then applying this consensus on the fly. And so that gives rise to a blockchain which has been live for about 2 years, which existed long before that as a testnet, but which now acts as a cryptocurrency and smart contract platform.
When was it exactly that it launched?
Well, the chain the main chain today was launched in June 30th of 2018.
Right. So it's been in development for a very long time. And
The
then,
development started around 2014.
yeah, so it took a
Yeah.
few years to develop. And then there was this huge ICO, right? I think you raised like the foundation raised more than $230 million at the time. And it obviously generated a lot of buzz, a lot of interest. Ever since then, the thing that really I find fascinating is the growth of Tezos, right? Because, let's be honest, right? Most ICOs went nowhere. We've seen a lot of these projects that raised very significant amounts of money. Most of them didn't really take off, at least not yet. And I've found it quite difficult to live up to the hype. With Tezos, it seems like it continues to grow quite a bit. How did you guys build such strong advocacy around the project?
So the common wisdom is that people will say like, oh, this project's failed because of incentive, because of the way they raise money, and so on and so forth, and governance. That's a common wisdom. I think it's completely wrong. I think a lot of these projects failed because they were bad ideas to begin with, and regardless of how they were funded, they would not have worked. They were just plain bad idea, and Tezos was a good idea, and that's like 99% of it. And it's, I think, for people who don't have the domain expertise, um, or who don't have enough like passion for this space, it's easy to it's easy to try to sound smart by by making it about this high level stuff, but it really isn't. It's about like ideas that make some sense and ideas that make absolutely no sense, and you could tell, you could tell before, right? You could tell beforehand.
So, like you're saying, basically, many of them were pretty much like a solution looking for a problem rather than the other way around.
No, it's not even that. It's that primarily these things, they make sense as cryptocurrencies. They make sense as censorship resistant store of values. They may also make sense as smart contract platform. But the problem is that there was a fetish at the time against competition. If you wanted to compete, you were bad. No one dared say that they wanted to compete with Bitcoin or with Ethereum. So when Ethereum came out, they were not on. God forbid they were not a Bitcoin competitor. Bitcoin is gold, and we're going to be oil for the gas for powering the smart contracts. Or Litecoin is like, oh no, we're silver. Everyone was trying to find differentiation. Uh, they were trying so hard to squeeze themselves into some sort of blue ocean strategy, even though it wasn't it. And so you had, it was hilarious. You had a network like Definity, which was like saying, "Oh, we're going to be a sister network to Ethereum." What the fuck does that mean? Nothing. It was no. It was built at the time as God knows what they're doing now, but like it was built at the time as a direct competitor, and yet they were trying to say like, no, we'll be a sister network, or you had Cosmos saying, we're going to do, we love Ethereum, we're going to do a hard spoon of Ethereum, isn't it great, we're all going to work together. A hard spoon, yeah, because like a fork is, that's pointy, that's dangerous. A spoon is very soft, that's great. A hard spoon means you're copying the entire network, and you're going to try to like completely rob it of its network effect. So it's kind of like it's kind of weird, and I think Tezos got a lot of hatred because I never basically like bought in this kind of pretend Care Bear. Oh, we're all going to work together, and there's going to next 200 networks bloom, and they're all going to exist, because it doesn't make sense, and this is fundamentally a winner take all type of situation. And so because of that situation, where if you were to building a layer one project, you somehow have to make like some sort of reasoning for why you were actually complementary with everything else. And then you had people who were building other type of token, and they were like, no, we're going to provide some other form of service, and our service is going to be oriented around a token, and the economics around that made no fucking sense. They were building open source software, and it was kind of like having a turnstile, like a paying turnstile in the middle of an open field. There was no reason whatsoever to expect this to work, because this project did not need a token. They were not a cryptocurrency. They did not need a token to exist. And with very, very few exceptions. And they tried to shoehorn tokens into things that didn't make sense. And that's why that's why they didn't succeed, because the whole thing didn't make any sense. The economics of the thing didn't make sense. But everyone and their mothers were enamored with this, and they were like, "Oh, this is so great! This is so much better than cryptocurrencies, because cryptocurrencies, you understand, it's this weird saying, because cryptocurrency is very subjective. It basically derives its value from network effect, from people ascribing value to it. So it's based on mythos, and it's based on social expectations. It's based on a lot of things, and instead." But the smart and the savvy people, they were looking at app coins. App coins was a big thing, and that was completely stupid. And I was happy to say it, and it got me a lot of scorn for being open about it. But I think that was dead on.
Really interesting point you made here. I want to focus on a couple of things you just said. How did you guys position Tezos? So you mentioned like a lot of the other projects try to view themselves or position themselves as being complementary to, Bitcoin and Ethereum. How was your position and thought process different?
Oh my God, it just reminds me, because Tezos has a big governance component. And so people were saying like, oh, is Tezos a network that's going to be used to do governance for the other networks? Like something that made strictly no sense, because a block, the only thing that has sovereignty over a blockchain is itself. Blockchain, can only enforce rules about itself. So like, no one could just like start you couldn't just start Tezos and say like, oh yeah, here's Tezos, and by the way, all of you other blockchains, you're now under the governance of Tezos. That makes no sense. And people were still trying to shoehorn it into that, because they were so desperate to think that it was going to be something different and not something that was going to compete. And so the way that it was positioned was basically, cryptocurrency smart contract platform, because being a smart contract platform makes your cryptocurrency a better cryptocurrency. And that was the type of application that Tezos was supposed to power, and the one that it does today.
Right. So in your mind, basically, you thought of it as like a direct competitor to Ethereum.
Here's the thing: I think that Ethereum is a direct competitor to Bitcoin.
Really? You think so? Isn't the use case a bit different?
No, it's exactly the same use case, except you have two cryptocurrencies, and one can do smart contracts and the other one can't. That's the difference. But no, it's not. And this is and now I think people are starting to realize it, but they're absolutely not complementary. And I don't think that both will.
Why not? Here's how I think about it, right? I actually think the use case is quite different, right? Because I think about Bitcoin as this store of value, digital gold.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I think about Ethereum as this smart contracts platform, right? That has these capability that, frankly, Bitcoin doesn't have, and is probably, more geared towards the mass usage that we see right now, right? Whether it's with stable coins or just powering a DeFi ecosystem.
I'm glad you're thinking that. But the fact that you're thinking that means that Ethereum basically shot itself in the foot in terms of narratives by trying to differentiate from Bitcoin, because now they've been trying to walk it back. There are voices in the Ethereum community that are trying very, very hard to walk this back. Like you look at on Twitter, Ryan S. Adams, for example, that's basically his beat. They're trying to walk it back because they know that fundamentally these networks work as cryptocurrencies, and they're trying to walk back the idea that no, it's just gas. But it's really tough, because now in people's mind it's like, oh, it's different. No, of course Ethereum is not. It's something different. But the reality is that, let's say that you only had Ethereum. Would you invent a version that didn't have smart contracts and say like, oh well, that one will be a cryptocurrency?
Yes, I would say yes, because I actually think one of the strengths of Bitcoin is its simplicity, right? It's very straightforward. Smart contracts is an amazing concept, and I think it can fuel basically the next generation of financial instruments and economy. But on the other hand, I think the beauty about Bitcoin is just that simplicity, right? And the fact that it's so secure and can serve that digital gold purpose. So again, I kind of tend to think that they serve different purposes. By the way, with regards to Ethereum, once ETH2 launches, right, and you have that staking capabilities, I guess more similar to what Tezos has already in place, you can either it's for gas or just for pure staking.
Yeah, but no, I'm sorry. I completely disagree with that point of view. Completely.
That's great.
Like, if I had to define, my view on this is like complete disagreement with this. Basically, so first of all, it's true that if you have more complexity, you have more attack surface. Like some strong Bitcoin proponents have made the argument that, oh, it's better not to have smart contracts because we don't have this attack surface, and that makes us safer. And I think it's a flawed argument, because even though you do have a higher attack surface, you don't have, at some point, you're able to actually make sure that it's secure with a high degree of confidence when it's been running for a long time, when you've had enough eyeballs look at it, when you've had enough analysis of the code, you get to that point. And at that point, it's, once you've done all of this vetting, then you've paid for that. In some sense you've paid in sweat for that functionality, but now it's there and you can rely on it. So it's not like it's an unsurmountable obstacle to have complexity. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to use this complexity. If you want to use something like Tezos, for example, and you want to use it just for the type of thing that Bitcoin does, you absolutely can do that. You don't have to use any smart contracts. You don't have to use any of the advanced functionality, but it's great that you can.
Yeah, but I guess where I differ on that view is that I think most people recognize there's this blockchain trilemma, right? Where, there is some trade-off between decentralization, security, and scalability. And if you skew more towards one end of the spectrum, then that kind of takes away from the other. You can't, basically, the point really, you can't be the best on, on all three. And so, like, different blockchains try to optimize for different use cases based on these trade-offs, right? And we see it, by the way, with other blockchains as well, right? Whether they're successful or not, right? Like, you can take the EOS example, where they have delegated proof of stake, and maybe that helps with throughput, but then some people argue, well, it's much less decentralized and so forth. Well, don't you agree with that? Like, are you saying like the blockchain dilemma is nonsense?
No, I don't agree with that. And if you look at some of the stuff I was saying in 2017, I think explicitly said blockchains have very few trade-offs. That's one of the things I would say. I do think there is a. I do think that there is a decentralization throughput trade-off in some sense. If you want to process a lot of things and have a lot of capacity, then it's harder to be decentralized. I think that's real. I also think that no one is nearly close to the today is nearly close to the efficient frontier, and so it's once we are at the efficient frontier where you start having to make trade-offs. If you want to have more throughput, you need to have less decentralization. Then we can talk about that, but no one is there. And so in some sense, what I would say is like for its level of centralization, EOS could have a lot more throughput than it has today. And likewise, for its level of throughput, Ethereum could be more decentralized than it is. So no one, and including Tezos, of course. But what I'm saying is like no one is close. So right now we're still I think everyone is still in the position of making giant leaps, both in decentralization and in throughput. We're not in a regime where it has to come at the expense of the other. And also, just because there are trade-offs doesn't mean that there are multiple equilibrium that will be of interest in the world. I think it's quite possible that the world just converge and say, like, actually, this point on the efficient frontier, that's where, that's what's interesting. I just wanted to be fair to Bitcoin. Like I said, I think if you had a version, if Bitcoin had started with smart contracts, I think that a competitor that said like, hey, isn't it great? We're going to remove smart contracts and we'll have a lower surface area, will be simpler. I think no one would take that. I think no one would take that seriously. The reason today is that Bitcoin is in the position that it is not because of the benefits that it has in terms of technology. It's because it's the first one. And like I said, the systems primarily rest on narratives. They primarily rest on social consensus. And just being the first comer is it's a huge advantage that's extremely hard to surmount. I would say that's a benefit. But trying to say that it somehow serves Bitcoin not to have smart contracts, I think is nonsense.
I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree.
Yeah. But it's important for me because I get frustrated sometimes when I see Tezos being judged by the narratives created by Ethereum. In some sense, I see like, oh, well, smart contract platform need to do X and cryptocurrencies need to do Y. And, Tezos was conceived as a cryptocurrency, and it's a cryptocurrency which has a nice ability of having smart contracts. And so that also makes it a smart contract platform. But somehow people are saying like, oh, well, if you can't do smart contracts, then we're going to judge you by this standard. But if you can do smart contracts, then all of a sudden you have to have all of the nonsense that people have been pitching for Ethereum. And that doesn't make sense. Just having the ability to do more shouldn't be held against you.
Totally see where you're coming from. I just have a different... I think it depends on what you optimize for, right? So for instance, like if Bitcoin's transaction fee goes up a bit, I don't think it's that dramatic to Bitcoin's long-term prospects of success, right? Because again, most people don't buy Bitcoin in order to use it very frequently. I think with smart contract platforms, again, if we take Ethereum, for example, right? If gas on Ethereum goes up significantly, like network gets congested, suddenly DeFi has no use cases, just completely destroy that, use case.
And then you gracefully degrade to just being a store of value. That's the thing. It's like your worst case scenario is you degrade to having the same functionality as Bitcoin.
Yeah, but then like Bitcoin has that proof of work consensus algorithm, which works differently, right? Different components in terms of security, in terms of decentralization and so forth. But again, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. But what I do think is also really interesting is that narrative war. Here, I do agree with you, right? I think narratives are being developed, they're being cultivated by certain projects, and then you kind of have to basically build your own narrative or you die over time, right? Because people buy into these narratives and they put these lenses on and start to think of it based on these narratives. So I do think, having a good story that is compelling and fits with what you're doing is crucial. By the way, not just in crypto, in general.
Yeah, and I think that like having it's really tough because I think
I
narrative
frustrated you with.
narrative and ideology, and it's very squishy and soft. And there's also a view, I think there's a view that's popular, that it's all about the technology, and it's not. I think technology is just the entry ticket. You need to have good technology, but the idea is that somehow someone is going to roll a better consensus algorithm or better technology, and it's going to change. I also don't buy that at all, and it's a view that's very popular with some people.
But it's not just the narratives, right? It's the use cases. For instance, if you tell me, listen, I want digital money that's going to be the equivalent of gold, just better, right? I think there's something that you need to develop for that, which is quite different than if you told me, hey, I want the equivalent of the US dollar, just that being digital. In my mind, these are two different products with different characteristics, different features that you need to put in place, completely different use cases. Like, I don't think it's all under that roof of cryptocurrency and one project wins it all.
I have the opposite thesis that you can actually you don't encounter many trade-offs in actually getting all of these use cases under one roof. Uh, and then it's a winner take all type of situation over a very long term. And it's not 100% winner take all. I think you can have regional winners. I think that instead of winner take all, you see a very big power law, for example, even probably steeper than what we see today. Or in some sense, the top currency dominates the second one, which dominates the third one even more than what we're seeing today. So I do believe that over longer time frame. I would say that the Bitcoin maximalists will tell you that it's absolutely ineluctable that Bitcoin is going to crush everything else and there will remain only Bitcoin. I don't share that view. I don't think it's ineluctable, but I do agree on principle with the idea that all of these networks are competing against each other fundamentally, and that there's not room for a lot of them. And it doesn't mean you have to be it doesn't mean you have to be rude to anyone. It doesn't mean you have to basically start attacking other people or just being a jerk generally. I think it's totally fine to understand that there's a lot of people trying to do cool stuff, and for now they may be fellow travelers, but at some point, at some point, it won't be about growing the pie for everyone. It will be about who's more relevant and who's less.
Interesting. That's definitely an interesting perspective, quite different than what many people in the space think.
And if you read the Tezos position paper, it's fundamentally maximalist in its creation, because if you just believe that these networks are created just for one purpose, and then what's the problem with just let's just fork everything? Why do you need to have a governance process for choosing a set of rules? Let's just 1,000 network room and we'll have one fork which does this and one fork which does that. What's the problem? Why can't we just do that? And so
again, I think there's trade-offs in the core architecture of these projects that again is quite different. But listen, like, some people do adopt that maximalism approach. Usually I think it's Bitcoin maximalism, but it's interesting. It's definitely thought-provoking and an interesting way to think about. So basically, in your mind, you view both Bitcoin and Ethereum as being direct competitors
yes.
of Tezos. Interesting.
Yeah.
Then you thought that way all along, like ever since you started developing?
Yeah, I think for me the intellectual journey that was the hardest was understanding that some people did not think that way, and I've always I always find it hard to I understand it on an intellectual level, but I just it's very hard for me to enter on an emotional level to understand where these people are coming from.
If I take this kind of one step forward and kind of think about the next steps, are you saying, well, listen, Bitcoin right now has no smart contract functionality, and it doesn't look like it's gonna have one anytime soon? Does that mean you're pretty bearish on Bitcoin long term?
Not necessarily, because, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the technology. So if you look at Bitcoin, is a technological improvement over gold. It's a huge technological improvement over gold, which means maybe it has a chance of displacing gold, for example, as a store of value. as some international store value and maybe means of payment, because you can actually transfer it far more easily than you could with gold. So from a technological improvements, you have something that is able to possibly beat the network effect of the incumbent. And the question is having smart contracts enough of a delta over the incumbent to beat the incumbent effect? And maybe not. It could be that smart contracts are nice to have, but that it's not going to move the needle, and that's quite possible.
Okay, because I thought, like, to your point, if it lacks that functionality, which seems to be quite important, right? Again, when you look at the DeFi movement and tons of development that's happening there, when you look at the development happening on top of Tezos and other smart contract platforms, like, I think if that's your view, then it's hard to be positive, I would think, about Bitcoin.
Oh, no. I think there's a very, very good chance that Bitcoin wins. But I think if it does, it won't be on its technical merit.
Meaning it's gonna have more features and capabilities that just don't exist right now.
No. Quite the opposite. I'm saying.
These features are not important.
It could be that those features are not important enough, and that it doesn't move the needle enough, and so Bitcoin wins anyway. That's quite possible.
Got it.
And in fact, if you're looking at if you're looking at markets, for example, that seems to be what markets think about Bitcoin. So it's not just a possibility; it's consensus.
Yeah, well, it's the clear leader right now, and at least in terms of market cap, right? And just in general, I would say brand awareness.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how that unfolds moving forward. Kind of shifting gears a bit, Arthur. What's your view on stablecoins? It seems like it's gaining a lot of momentum, especially now, more recently with that COVID-19 crisis. I think, funny enough, I think more and more governments are starting to support the notion of stablecoins. Obviously, their version of stablecoins, right, being regulated by the central bank and so forth. How do you think about that? Do you see an opportunity for Tezos developing a stablecoin and building on that moving forward?
So the first thing is, I find, and I'm not going to win that battle. I know that, but I find it very sad that people have come to describe what is basically tokenized fiat currency as stablecoin. Historically, a stablecoin has always been some form of financial engineering. You would financially engineer something inside of a blockchain to produce a token whose value might be stable. And they were very bad designs for this, and they were better ones, for example, like MakerDAO. So that was a stable coin. And the dead simple approach, if you want to do another dead simple approach, if you want to do that, is to not bother with the decentralization aspect and just say, oh, well, I'm going to put a bunch of euros in a bank account and I'm going to represent that liability on the blockchain. And that's now what people call a stable coin. And I think that's a bit of a misnomer. And then now you're talking about like a central bank creating they're not creating a stable coin. Like what does this mean? There's no stabilization. It's just tokenizing something. It's just another form of digital money. So I find it profoundly weird to call it a stable coin. That's the first thing. I'm not super interested in the latter kind of like tokenized fiat. It's straightforward. There's no technological challenge whatsoever to it. Maybe it serves a purpose. So if it serves a purpose for now, great. Why not have that on blockchains? But from a technological standpoint, it's extremely uninteresting. And so there are many people tokenizing different kind of assets on Tezos. It's a good blockchain for tokenizing assets. So by any means, if anyone wants to, if anyone is looking to tokenize fiat and create this type of stablecoins, I think they should consider Tezos, absolutely. But on a personal level, it's not something I'm super interested in. I've been working myself on the design of. So now that the battle for the word stablecoin is lost, a design called something called I call a RoboCoin, because it's like a robot. It basically takes you basically have a smart contract that acts on the on some on some financial mechanism for making something that's not exactly pegged, but that's relatively stable-ish. By the way, I think the only way you can get a perfect peg is if you do tokenized fiat. If you don't do tokenized fiat, you can do something that's pretty good, but it's not going to maintain a perfect peg. It's impossible.
Yeah. So what do you have in mind? If you don't peg it to fiat, how do you create some sort of stability?
Yeah. So first of all, if you look at something like DAI on MakerDAO, it's not, you might think it's pegged to the dollar, but it's not really pegged to the dollar because there's a stability fee. And so, if I have one DAI, after a while, I get more DAIs. And so, and that's been a long time like this on MakerDAO because there was more interest for people to create so-called CDPs than they were to actually hold this type of stablecoin. And so, as a result, you were compensated for holding the stablecoin. Now we're in a different regime with DAI, where there's actually more demand for holding DAIs than there's demand for creating CDPs. And that creates a situation where they would want to have a negative fee, but their system does not let them have a negative fee. So ideally, what you want is you want something that's close to a peg, but that can drift over time. So you create something where the peg slowly drifts. So maybe it starts at 1, and then by the end of the year, your peg is 0.98. Or maybe by the end of the year, your peg is 1.02. Could be up, could be down, depending on the relative interest between holding this Ruble and creating CDPs.
I mean, DAI is pegged to the dollar, but obviously you use crypto collateral to create that peg.
But my point is that it's not really pegged to the dollar because if you look at DAI, what you really should be looking at is CHAI, which is continuous DAI. And it's basically what you do is if you just put your DAI in a smart contract, you tokenize that, and you get CHAI. And if you see CHAI, until recently you had a stability fee at 6%, and so the CHAI peg would change over time, and that's a real coin. The real coin is CHAI, not DAI. And so I would argue that DAI is not actually pegged to the dollar, not in a meaningful sense, at least.
You mean because you get that interest rate, then basically you don't think about it? Because I mean, one DAI is worth $1, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah,
but
that's just an accounting trick. Because the supply, because this changes they change the supply of DAI so that it will stay at $1 by giving you more DAI. And of course, and that breaks down if the stability fee gets negative. Like what they would have to do is take away DAI from you. So in some trivial sense, they were early proposal for so-called stablecoin, which were very where they were saying like, oh well, if it goes below a certain value, we'll just remove some from your wallet. And so sure, yeah, you just renormalize every single time you open your wallet, and there you go. You have the value of your coin is stable, but the supply is not. One day you have 100 token, and the other day you have 110 token, and the next day you have 90 token. So of course, if you do it like that way, it's trivial to have something that's going to be pegged, but that's not a real peg. I don't think you can do a real peg. I don't think you can have parity without convertibility.
Interesting. So when you think about the future, right, let's say like 5-10 years from now, do you see a world where maybe there's a currency that isn't pegged to, the dollar or any other fiat currency that's widely used? Is that...
I mean, the euro is widely used and is not pegged to the dollar.
Yeah. I mean, either the dollar or any other, major fiat currency. Like, I wonder if you see a cryptocurrency, like a native cryptocurrency that isn't pegged to any major fiat currency that's being widely used. For instance, people go and buy coffee with it. Like, do you think we'll get there?
I'm not sure. I don't think that the competitive use case for cryptocurrencies is buying coffee. So maybe not. I'm not so sure. But what's more interesting is that I think you could have robocoins which stabilize their value with respect to purchasing power and not necessarily to any external fiat currency.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, how would that work?
Okay, so let's say you have a system where people take some crypto collateral, and then against that collateral they mint they mint a robocoin, for example, and then they use it. You might say, how do you measure this? You want to measure the stability of your system so that you decide if people need to put more collateral or less collateral. And one way you can do this is by trying to compare the value of your robocoin and the value of an external fiat currency, and that will tell you if it's stable in some sense. You anchor it to something that you know is somewhat stable. That's one way to do it. Another way you can do it is you can look at the total amount of collateral that's placed. How much is locked. And if it's large, then you know that you have achieved that you have something that's stable. And the reason why is that people would not want to lock their collateral if if the underlying robocoin is going to be very very volatile with respect to their purchasing power. And likewise, people less likely want to hold it if it's volatile. So just by measuring the amount that you issue, you have an intrinsic measure of stability. And that's that I find that super interesting. Basically, you can it means that in the world you can look at credit markets as for example, as an indication of stability. And I haven't seen anyone try to do anything like that so far, but it's a possibility. You could also just do it from governance. You can have users of your system decide that, hey, you know what, we think that this stable coin or robocoin has lost too much of its value, and there needs to be some tightening or some easing. So you can absolutely do that.
Curious about what you said earlier. So when you think about cryptocurrency, where do you see the biggest opportunity? And not even necessarily Tezos. I mean, obviously you can talk about Tezos, but I'm just wondering in general, where do you see the biggest opportunity? You mentioned you don't think it's necessarily in buying coffee and kind of use it as a daily currency. Where do you see the big promise of cryptocurrency?
Oh, a few things. So I think that the one use case that's been really demonstrated and constantly present has been store of value, censorship resistant store of value. And it's very hard for people to accept that it is using. If you hold a Bitcoin, for example, if you buy it and you just hold it, every second that you're holding it, you are using it. You're using it as a way to transfer value through time. And it's a process called saving. And people don't. We live in a society which discourages savings in many ways, and so it's really, really hard for people to understand that. But the idea is that you want, you want to buy things in the future, and you don't know how to transfer value in the future. Maybe you could hold fiat currency, but it might be debased, or it might be seized, or it might be stolen from you. And the idea that you can hold a cryptocurrency instead, that's valuable. It may be, for some people, it may be harder to steal cryptocurrency from them than it would be to steal fiat from them. For some people, it may be much more likely that the fiat will be debased. And so that's an important value, and holding is using. And very, very few people understand that. But the reason why something like a cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, for example, which doesn't have any cash flows, all of these cryptocurrencies, they're not claims on some underlying business. They are intrinsically valuable because they have a convenience yield. And the idea of the convenience yield is that you are, in some sense, as a user, as a holder, willing to pay a premium just for holding this. And you can see it if you look at the Bitcoin futures, for example. You'll see the backwardation, and so you can see that there's this convenience yield. Very few people understand that properly about cryptocurrencies that holding is using. So that, I think, is a very important use case. And
yeah, absolutely.
People dismiss it because they are so desperate to find something more cool than that. But I don't think it has to be. When I talk about saving, explicitly has nothing to do with any type of price appreciation. It has to do with the fact that it's value that is not debased over time. You have one Bitcoin at one point, you're going to get one Bitcoin at another point in the future. And it's not about, and the fact that it might go from 300 to 20,000 is not a feature. It's a bug. Ideally, it would have a much more stable um, uh, it would have a much more stable purchasing power.
So you're referring more to the monetary aspects of it and the fact that no one can print more of this, and the monetary policy is transparent. Nobody can really change that.
But also, you can hold it in multi-sig. So you can have safe form of self custody with Bitcoin. There are very, very few assets which are as transmissible as Bitcoin and that have a form of self custody. You know, if you live in a country and the country is invaded and people could seize immediately your bank accounts. They could seize they could seize your furniture, they could seize your house, they could seize everything. The one thing that they might not be able to seize is your cryptocurrency. And so,
Yeah.
if you live in this situation, then you don't care if it's going from 20,000 to 10,000 or 10,000 to 20,000. That's not the point. The point is that you'd still have something, and ideally, it wouldn't move as much, but at least you have something, and you value it despite the volatility.
Yeah, I tend to think they are all connected in one way or the other, right? Because of the benefits of it being something that you can't really censor easily, because it's so easy to transfer it, it's digitally native, and so forth. I think the more people get exposed to it, the more people learn about it, there's more demand, right? And there's obviously fixed supply. So I do think that they're all related. And by the way, if the price went down significantly over time, like, do you still think it would be a good savings mechanism? If Bitcoin was worth 8,000 3 years ago and now it's worth 800.
It depends on individual circumstances. It depends on everyone's threat model. Like, I think everyone has a different view of what might happen to fiat currencies in the future. Everyone has different views as to what might happen to the banking system in the future. And so, depending on how people think about that, I think that it's not necessarily the first criterion, or at least shouldn't be.
Hopefully you agree that it's going to be a much tougher sale, though, if it loses, significant portion of its value over time.
But it can. I mean, it has in the past. It just because Bitcoin went up at one point doesn't mean it won't go down, and the past doesn't predict the future.
Any other developments in the crypto space you're excited about beyond savings? I think that was your first point.
Yeah. So I think basically having an internet native form of payment is also super interesting. So the ability to just set up a website and be able to accept payment immediately from anywhere in the world with a standard that just works, as opposed to having to go through third parties. The barriers it remove for immediately trying something and monetizing something, I think, are huge. And so I think that's also one of the important use cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the third one, the third thing that cryptocurrencies are great for is they're great for paying for smart contracts execution. It's one of the things that you can use a cryptocurrency for, pay for smart contract execution. And so that's why it's so great to have smart contracts on your on a cryptocurrency blockchain, because cryptocurrencies are uniquely well suited to pay for the execution of smart contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. From your perspective, Arthur, what's holding us back from seeing more mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, and in particular, smart contract platforms, right? How do we go from where we are right now to the next phase, right? Basically, smart contracts being much more widely used. What are we missing right now?
I think we're missing a lot of good UX. I think in general the experience of using smart contract is pretty terrible, and so that needs to get I think that needs to get a lot better before we see much adoption. I also think that many projects are not trying to solve real problems. So either they're trying to solve real problems that real people have, but problems that don't necessitate a blockchain at all, or they're trying to solve problems that don't exist. And there are few. I think there are few problems which for which smart contracts do make sense. And I think there's a type of things that people don't yet know that they want, and so it's I think it's going to take longer. There's this idea that somehow every technological revolution needs to happen faster because people say, oh well, look how long it took from mobile, from regular phones to cell phones to smartphones, and every single time the time to adoption becomes faster and faster. But the thing is like if you had a phone and all of a sudden I give you a cell phone, the value prop is super easy. It's like, you had your phone and it used to be plugged in a wall and now you can take it with you. It doesn't, it enables new user pattern and user behaviors, but it's not very hard to explain the value prop.
Yeah.
And if you have a smartphone, you're like, well, your computer, now you have your computer on your phone. Easy. So it doesn't require much of a paradigm change. This is more like the introduction of the personal computer, where people are like, what the heck are we going to do with that? And it takes longer because people are not used to it. And this is even weirder because we're touching at things, the idea of money, the idea of value, which have been rooted in humanity for millennia. Like the idea that you need intermediaries for making payments, for example, that's something that's been going on for millennia. And so
right.
Changing this is going to take more than a few years.
Yeah, I also think like it's so sensitive, right? I mean, this is money we're talking about. If you develop an app for whatever, like deliveries or something, if it doesn't work perfectly, fine. But like if I send you money and it's lost, or I used custody somewhere and it's gone,
Mm-hmm.
that's like you can go wrong there, which in turn means that the people developing these solutions have to do a lot of due diligence and have to be very careful, right? You can't just put something very scrappy together and just like launch it and then iterate from there. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So last question before we finish out through, what's next for Tezos? Anything in particular you're excited about?
Yeah, sir. So, there are regularly upgrades which are proposed to on the Tezos network, and the participant in the Tezos network can vote to accept upgrades to the code. And I know there's one that's been in the work for a while, which introduces privacy-preserving transactions inside Tezos smart contracts. And I think many people in the community have been excited about that, and I think it's coming to fruition, and so that's really that's something that's really exciting.
Yeah, well, definitely looking forward to that. Again, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of this discussion, it's really been very interesting to see the growth of Tezos over time. So definitely looking forward to see where you guys go from here. Thanks so much for taking the time out to come on the show. Really appreciate you sharing your views and insights. And I personally just really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Me too. It's very interesting because we have very different theses on.
Yeah, which I find to be the best discussions, right? Because it just generates a lively debate about these issues we're all so passionate about.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arthur.
Thank you, Tomer. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode of the Blockchain VC and want to help bring more awareness to the space, I'd really appreciate it if you can rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. This only takes a few seconds and helps get the word out.